Lone Star State of Texas. Grand Central Sports Hub is live on the air, episode 4.5. Seth Cantor, Jay-Z, down in Texas. We have a great show lined up for you today. Bob Galerstein, the legendary Bob Galerstein, nearly 40 years of sportscasting experience, and was the public address announcer at Madison Square Garden when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup in 1994. You can hear him in the mornings on SiriusXM. Bob joins us in a little bit. We're also going to talk about our favorite sportscasters by sport a little later on. We expect to have Diamond Dan for that. We'll take your comments as well. We're going to remember a couple of very important people, including one in the sports world. But before we dive into what's happening right now, Jay-Z, good evening. How's everything down in the Yellow Rose of Texas?
Good evening, Seth. It is quite a nice day here. We are quarantined at 75 degrees. I already used the smoker today, and it's been a successful afternoon. Bright sunshine as well. And just ready to have what I feel is the highlight of my lockdown week, right? Just talking to you, Diamond Dan, our guests, and to all of our friends.
It's not every day, though, you get to talk with somebody who is associated with the Rangers winning the Cup in 1994. So you're in for a treat. Bob Galerstein, great guy, one of the great guys in the business. So we're going to touch on the headlines before we bring Bob in a little bit. So the NFL draft, this is going to be an NFL draft unlike any other. 1 week away. Roger Goodell is going to do the first round from his basement, and now we all know where Roger Goodell lives. So if he makes a decision we don't like, we can all go after him. No, I'm joking. He lives in Bronxville, New York, in the greater New York City area, and he is going to do the first round of the draft from his basement. So, Jason, compelling content. I want to start the show up with this. What do you think Roger Goodell's basement looks like?
I'm feeling wood paneling. Right, wood paneling, maybe some gaudy gold accents, bunch of trophies in the background. Something like one of our grandparents had, something like that. That's what I'm feeling Goodell's basement's going to look like, unless he gets one of these fancy green screen things that I got going on here. It's going to be quite fascinating and very enlightening.
I know 4 things about Roger Goodell's basement without having been there. Number 1, it's not the basement that Rocky Balboa trained in. Number 2, he's not going to be interfacing on Windows 95. Number 3, he's not going to be using a 56K dial-up modem. And number 4, he's not going to have a tube TV. I'm picturing something like the Situation Room. But as we talk about the NFL draft, a couple of things are for certain right now. The top 2 picks in my mind are chalk. They're layups. Joe Burrow's going to the Bengals. He has personal ties with Ohio. Those ties run very deep. And Chase Young, who grew up 25 minutes from FedEx Field, is going to Ron Rivera, Riverboat Ron, ultimately Dan Snyder and the Redskins. 3 through 6, that's where it really gets interesting. The Lions have that 3rd pick. Bob Quinn, their GM, has said they're willing to trade down. So you have the Chargers and Dolphins, who both need quarterbacks. Should be interesting to see if those two will get into a bidding war. The Lions could get a king's ransom for that 3rd pick, but lying in the weeds are the Patriots, who's saying that you're not going to draft a quarterback, but with Bill Belichick, you never know. So the question now becomes Tua Tagovailoa. Tank for Tua. Are these teams, let's say the Dolphins and the Chargers, get a tank for Tua, or now is it Justin Herbert, the Oregon quarterback, because of Tua Tagovailoa's health? I'll tell you this, in my mind, Tua's never been a top 3 quarterback or a top 3 draft pick, so I'm kind of seeing Justin Herbert moving up.
Is there any, and just to back up real quick with Burrows, is there any concern with him playing for the Bengals, or was that just an unsubstantiated rumor?
No, he's dropped some hits. He's dropped some cryptic hints, but I think everything now is leading up to the Bengals and Joe Burrow being a Cincinnati Bengal, yes.
I remember Herbert even, before this year, he was highly thought after as someone, if the Giants were, if they never drafted Daniel Jones last year, there were, people talking about Herbert being the next big thing. He's been looked at for a few years. It would not be shocking if he's drafted ahead of Tua.
I'll tell you this, I think the Patriots thing could potentially be real. I could see the Patriots giving up a king's ransom to get number 3. None of the names the Patriots have right now really impress me. And Jarrett Stidham, I know our buddy Ray Martell is very high on Stidham, but I don't see Stidham being the long-term guy. I don't see Brian Hoyer being the long-term guy, obviously, given his age and the mileage that he's had within the league. So I wouldn't rule out the Patriots, and I wouldn't rule out the Patriots giving the Lions a king's ransom to move up to number 3. The Giants, 2 biggest needs. We talk about this every week. Diamond Dan, at his angry text, he could tell you how he feels. But the 2 biggest needs, the Giants need a pass rusher. I feel like they haven't had a great pass rushing linebacker since Antonio Pierce, or You need an offensive lineman, specifically a tackle, to help Daniel Jones fix his fumbling issues. That's a very big problem. So the two names that I see for the Giants right now, Isaiah Simmons, the linebacker from Clemson, or Tristan Wirth, the offensive tackle out of Iowa. What do you think about what the Giants need?
If they're both available, Seth, you go. What would you prefer? I guess is the question. Giants needed an offensive line's been an issue for years, but when you look back at really good Giant teams, Super Bowl winning Giant teams, it's always the pass rush and the defense. So I'm kind of conflicted.
It is. I want to protect Daniel Jones. The fumbling to me is an issue, and offensive linemen don't grow on trees. I'm taking the offensive lineman, and I like Tristan Wirfs for the Giants. The Jets, their offensive numbers last year are absolutely anemic. You have to help Sam Darnold. Now, do you do that with an offensive lineman like Mekhi Becton from Louisville? A lot of mock drafts have Becton going to the Jets. Or do you overcome the loss of Robbie Anderson with a guy like Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, or Henry Ruggs III? If I'm the Jets, I still think I need to protect Sam Darnold, and I'm taking the offensive lineman. I have offensive lineman going for the Jets and Giants.
Number 2.
That's where I'm going.
Yeah, and the Jets, I mean, last year, disappointing. They have a ton of holes. Listen, anything they can do to get them on the upswing, but they have. I think for them, it's a little less clear than the Giants, right? I would think they have more. Like the Giants know what you need. The Jets, I feel like they don't have game breakers per se. I mean, the Giants have an elite running back, got a couple guys who can catch a ball. Yeah. The Jets have some work to do.
The Jets' offensive numbers were bad, and they need a playmaker. They have a collection now of second-rate wide receivers, and I actually think the Jets are going to lean towards a playmaker and a guy like Jerry Jeudy. But if I were the Jets, if I'm Joe Douglas, and I'm clearly not, because I'm sitting here in a dungeon in Bergen County right now with cinder block walls. If I'm the Jets, I'm going to Mekhi Becton. I'm going to go protect Sam Darnold. That's where I would go. So talking to us next week, I am going to my friends at SiriusXM hard. We had Howie Carpin last week, Bob Galerstein this week, and then coming up next week, the real thing, the real deal, the living legend, Zig Fracassi of SiriusXM NFL Radio is going to be helping us out and giving us his draft perspective next Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. I figure being on next Thursday at 8 Eastern, it's just a lost cause. Everybody's going to be watching the draft. Nobody's going to be watching us. What's the point?
If this isn't the high, well, the point is we're great, right? That's the point. But if this isn't the highest rated NFL draft in the history of the NFL draft, we have a problem here. What else are you going to be doing?
Listen, I am starving. I am starving for content right now. I cannot watch any more replays of games. I just can't.
I was watching you play PS4 on YouTube yesterday.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is what it's come to. This is what we do. People are watching us on a thing. That's like, ooh.
Well, so Zig is going to help us break down. Zig's great, by the way. One of the friends I've made in the newsroom there, along with Bob. And Zig's going to join us. That's next Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on the Grand Central Sports Hub. A couple of other things that I want to touch on. It's just in football, we just learned that Von Miller tested positive for COVID-19, so we certainly hope he turns out to be all right. The Michael Jordan documentary is starting to get some headlines, and it starts on Sunday night on ESPN at 9 Eastern. It's a 10-part series called The Last Dance. I don't want to dig too much into it because we have Bob waiting in the wings. But again, I am starving. I am hungry for compelling content, and this seems like it's going to be it. I can't watch the classic games anymore. To me, a couple of points on Jordan and the Bulls of those years. In my lifetime, the Bulls are the greatest dynasty that I've seen. Sorry to the Patriots, but the Bulls didn't lose in the championship round. And Michael Jordan is the greatest player I've ever seen personally, and there's nothing LeBron James can do to change that. Not a thing. Not a thing. So I'm interested to see the behind-the-scenes look. And as a Knicks fan, I would take the Knicks losing to the Bulls in Game 7 every single year as opposed to what I'm getting now. But I'm kind of interested now to see the behind-the-scenes inner workings of those Bulls teams because has 6 rings. Michael Jordan, very intense. A lot of Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant in terms of the intensity. Jordan rode his teammates pretty hard, so I'm looking forward to seeing how the inner workings were.
What's fascinating to me is just reading up on it today is finding out Phil Jackson, this was his last season. Even if they went 82-0, he was told it was the last season. They ended up rallying around that, but very fascinating that a head coach of a dynasty was going to be let go no matter what happened that season.
And the last thing I want to touch on, there's something else we can get to after Bob. I don't want to keep Bob waiting. Charles Oakley had some less than nice things to say about Patrick Ewing, saying the 90s Knicks were held back by Patrick Ewing. No, Charles. The 90s Knicks were held back by the fact that Knicks management never traded or got a free agent that could be second to Patrick Ewing. They didn't have enough star power behind Patrick Ewing to win. They had a bunch of role players. Pat Riley got the most out of those role players, and that's why the Knicks of the 90s couldn't get over the top and win a championship. Just
listen, leaders and their leadership, it's easy to target them when it's all said and done after. Easy target. Way too soft of a target for him to go after now. But when you have John Starks in game 7 of the 94 finals going 2 for 18 and 0 for 11 for 3, that's not Patrick Ewing's fault. Drop a couple of those in the bucket, Starks, and maybe you win maybe MSG has 2 champions that year. How about that?
Maybe, but MSG definitely had one champion that year, and a man that saw it, he was front and center, Bob Galerstein, a gentleman that I work with at SiriusXM Satellite Radio. He's a morning drive sports anchor, also a sports anchor for ABC News Radio. He's worked at ESPN. He's been with the Yankees, Giants, Islanders, Flyers, Red Bulls, and we want to reminisce with Bob about the Rangers Stanley Cup Championship in 1994. He was a PA announcer at the Garden from 1993 to 2002. Bob, good evening. And we hope you're doing well out there.
Well, Seth and JC, I just want you guys to know that next Thursday night, your ratings are going to be a lot higher than It's a Wonderful Life and the Super Bowl. You're underestimating your show.
Oh, boy. Thank you, Bob. Checks in the mail. Checks in the mail. Bob, let's start with this. One word. What would be the one word you would use to describe the Rangers' first cup in 54 years back in 94?
A word I still use today, and that is surreal. Because I don't think it'll ever fully sink in. I was sitting there ringside watching the whole procession. The public address announcer every hockey game is always obviously ringside. And I'm watching the whole thing, and Messier's raising the cup 15 feet in front of me, and everyone touched the cup as he's skating around. And then everyone files into the locker room, and then I'm walking on the ice afterwards, and I go to the locker room myself. And I drink out of the Stanley Cup in the locker. It's so steamy. and then there was a big party at the play-by-play restaurant, which then was at the Garden. And so at that time, I drank out of the cup again. And someone took a picture with my camera, which I have framed on my wall in my man penthouse. I don't have a man cave. I have a man penthouse. It's upstairs. And that by the time I had that second drink out of the Stanley Cup, 10,000 mouths had touched that cup. And people were pouring God knows what into the Stanley Cup. So it was the most awful tasting conglomeration of beer, wine, hard alcohol, whatever it was. And I caught the worst, seriously, 3.5 weeks, the worst cold of my life, drinking out of the Stanley Cup twice that night. And
that's Corona.
But surreal. To answer your question, to this day, it's surreal. I don't think it'll ever fully sink in.
There was that year, right? So the 92 Rangers had a nice season, heartbreaking in the playoffs. 93 was a terrible disappointment. They don't make the playoffs. Roger Nielsen gets fired.
So because Messier and Nielsen didn't get along.
Right. And going into the opening night of 94. So we've just hit the high point, the what just happened. Opening night of 94, they get the big fish. You got your A+ coach in Keenan. Was there a certain different feeling to that opening night and that season going in that ever has been before?
Yes, it was. And that was in large part because Mike Keenan wanted to do that. What Mike Keenan had the MSG Network production people do was he had the Rangers envisioning a Stanley Cup parade before the regular season began. So in essence, the season started at the end with the parade. And so what they did was they took generic enough highlights from ticker tape parades, video of that, down the Canyon of Heroes, and the MSG Network people then superimposed the Stanley Cup in there. So they had the Rangers players envisioning from day one that this is the goal this year and nothing less is acceptable. Now, yes, every single team goes into the season with that goal, but the way Keenan presented it that particular year, made a difference. And when I was doing the introductions on the public address for that opening night, that was my first year with the Rangers, by the way, 93, 94.
Oh.
So actually, it was me. It wasn't Messier or Keenan. It was me. B follows A,
Yes.
therefore A cause B. Well, so, anyways, but the crowd was so loud and responsive during the introductions of that opening night. Yes, it did start then. Jay-Z, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head right there.
Yeah, I had seen that, but in documentaries and things about the team, it sets the tone, right? Because we were just talking, Seth. We were just talking about how the Knicks in '94 were successful, but looking for that leadership piece, perhaps. So with the Rangers having a coach, an incredible leader, the captain, one of the best leaders of all time, kind of sets the tone for the team. Is there one point of that season that was a turning point? Any adversity you remember from your spot? Is there a spot there where you said, wow, this is going to be a make it or break it moment?
I don't think necessarily make or break. It was get your head out of the sand moment is probably, Jay-Z, the best way to describe that. And it was sometime in late October, I believe it was, or early November. I think it was late October. The then expansion Mighty Ducks of Anaheim came into the Garden and beat the Rangers 4-2, 4-3, whatever it was. So you lose at home to an expansion team, and you're a team that is expected to win the Stanley Cup. And the next day of practice, Keenan essentially, and they practiced, they were a little lackadaisical, and he did one of those, coach situations where you break the stick over the crossbar of the goal, and he essentially read them the riot act and skated them hard, and they had a hard practice, and they turned it around. And if there was a make or break moment, actually it was in late October, after that the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim defeat.
I remember that game. Leach got benched, right? Keenan stopped coaching, for lack of a better term, on the bench.
Yep.
And Terry Yates had a hat trick for the Ducks. So I still remember that. So if that tells you anything, that definitely was a big game. My memory's not that great, but I remember that game.
Not about the hat trick. You're right. Yeah, he was cast off. Sure.
It was an embarrassing game. So if you're shooting for the Stanley Cup as your goal, the coach set the tone and was not happy with that. Seth.
We're joined by Bob Galerstein, former public address announcer at Madison Square Garden, morning drive sports anchor for SiriusXM. Bob, I want to ask you, the fact that there seemed to be tension between Neil Smith and Mike Keenan. In fact, I think they were brought into a room together late in the year and read the riot act, and the Rangers were so successful. What does that speak to the chemistry of that team?
You have to look at the then president of Madison Square Garden, Bob Galerstein, who essentially served as the peacemaker, the go-between, and kind of kept the chemistry going between them. Messier also helped a lot in helping bridge the gap between the two. But Bob Galerstein essentially was the one that was the glue for that whole thing, because Neil Smith and Keenan really didn't get along. I mean, Neil said he was miserable after the season. He won the Stanley Cup and he was elated, but he was miserable also. And so the whole thing, I'm getting ahead of ourselves, that whole thing where they didn't pay him, so they allowed him to become a free agent and then become the head coach of St. Louis the next year. That was all a planned item. But Bob Galerstein was actually the glue behind the scenes, the then president of the Garden, that kept that coalition together fairly well. And, if you also remember that all the trades that Neil Smith made at the deadline a lot of them were Mark Messier recommendations. You had all the Edmonton players coming in. And Craig McTavish, who took the last face-off, Glenn Anderson, who got two big short-handed goals in the playoffs. And, of course, the most controversial one was giving up Mike Gartner for Glenn Anderson. That was that would have been Gartner's cup. And would Gartner have done just as well, if not better, than Anderson in the playoffs? We'll never know. But the point is, they won the cup. So It worked out. Yeah. It worked out. But Bob Galerstein was the glue that kept them together.
The Gartner, I was a big Mike Gartner guy. I definitely felt for him not getting his cup and his ring. Another big one there was trading Amante. So you won the cup. We're not going to sit here and Matteau. What if you don't get Matteau and it doesn't change? But it shows you those tough decisions. This team was running away with the division at the deadline. And the head coach did not feel they were a playoff team. We see that a lot. The Tampa Bay Lightning They can't get over the hump the last couple of years. They're an exceptional regular season team. They're not a playoff team. So a tough decision was made, which ultimately paid off. But the day of the deadline, that day there was a game. It was I don't remember if there was a home game. Do you remember if there was a home game that day and what the feeling was around the arena?
I could look up if it was a home game upstairs with my library, but I forget, Jay-Z, exactly. But I know what you're alluding to. Yeah. And it was just all the changes. They got brought in 5. This is a team that had the tools, had the players in place, and they get 5. I think it's 5 new players on or about the trade deadline. Brian Noonan, who actually was the one who scored the cup-winning goal in Game 7. It wasn't Messi. It was actually Noonan. It was the last one to touch the puck. But okay, give it to Messi. So be it. Another one. What's his name? His name escapes me. Another grinder, another third or fourth liner who was terrific. But anyways, it was like, wow, what are they doing here? Okay, this better work out, because this is not only on Neil, but it's also on Mark, because he's the one pushing it, all of his Edmonton buddies here. And there's also the Chicago connection. People forget the Larmer trade was huge. Yeah. Pete Larmer is one of those guys who is not a Hall of Famer, but he's just below it. And he's not one who was obviously the media always crowded around. So he didn't always get the attention, but he was one of the most underrated players that year and during his entire tenure with the Rangers. So that was also another terrific acquisition. I just wish, Neil's drafting later on didn't go all that well, and some of his trades didn't go all that well. But Neil also was the one that hired me, so I always have a soft spot in my heart for Neil.
Eastern Conference Finals, Game 6. What was your reaction when Messier guaranteed the Rangers would win at the Meadowlands down 3-2?
I was at that game. I was able to procure with the Rangers. We had a section in the upper corner of the Meadowlands Arena. And so I was sitting, I had Kevin Lowe's family sitting in front of me, and then Mark Messier's family sitting next to Kevin Lowe's family. And we're just watching this Devils domination for a period and a half. And then all of a sudden, Alex Kovalev, and they said, I was told from the start, it's Kovalev, not Kovalov. They were very specific about that. So, okay. That's why I will call him Alex Kovalev, not Love. And then all of a sudden, he does his thing. He is, just as an aside, later on he played for the Ottawa Senators, and he was so skilled, but the way he did things, the best player in the history of the Ottawa Senators was Alex Kovalev, and the worst player in the history of the Ottawa Senators was Alex Kovalev. So anyways, I digress. But he did his thing where he skated up ice by himself, just terrific. He single-handedly almost broke that trap of the Devils. And he did it on this rush later on in the second period, and he put that slap shot by Brodeur. And 2-1, all of a sudden, they have life. And then in the third period, Messier does his thing. And I remembered after the backhander, half the 3/4 of the length of the ice to go into the empty net. And I just, I said out loud, the magic of Mark Messier is unbelievable. And Kevin Lowe's sister turned around, looked at me, and smiled. And it was like, it was a surreal moment. I was sitting next to my boss at the Garden, Bobby Goldwater, who ran the whole building. And we were stunned. But we said, there's still a Game 7 to go. But this was pretty good. But so the atmosphere in Game 7 was, oh my goodness. And then when, was it Valerius Villapukin who scored with 7.7 seconds?
Yeah, I think so.
And so we're going, oh my God. So I went up in between periods. We had nothing planned between periods. We were just playing music, and Zamboni's resurfacing the ice. I had a couple of close buddies that were in one of the sections, excuse me, above me in a corner. And one of my buddy, Jack, and he was kind of in a catatonic trance after the first overtime. And then they went up. He was in outer catatonic trance both the end of the game and the end of the first overtime. And we're stunned. We're like, oh. And then when Matteau scored, the place went nuts, but it was also relief. Utter relief that, oh my God, we're actually in the Stanley Cup Finals. We did it. We actually did it. And if you remember, when they presented, it was the Prince of Wales trophy to Messier, he kind of held it up a little bit, but he didn't hoist it and he didn't pass it around to his teammates because he was acknowledging respect for the Prince of Wales trophy, but he was also saying by what he was doing that it really wasn't the trophy of note. So he held it up, smiled for all the cameramen, camera people that were right in front of me, and he put the trophy down and, skated back into the locker room. So that led us to the Stanley Cup Finals, and then that game went overtime loss at home.
I still remember that. I was playing a Little League game, and then I go home. I was like, wait, we lost game one. We had like 50 shots, and McLean stunned them. And I was like, we lost game one. It's all over. Why are we even doing this? You just go right down the tubes. Those emotional roller coasters are real.
As Seth knows, growing up in New York, you have Rangers, Islanders, Devils fans, on one block. Marty Brodeur's agent was a Rangers fan, and he always used to tease his agent about that. So that's how, incestuous rooting for hockey in metropolitan New York can be. I don't know if you guys know, but I've announced for all three teams in the market. I've done radio for 6 years for the Islanders. I did public address 2 years for the Devils, and so I've had a feel for all three teams. But I grew up in New York when the Rangers were the only game in town. We used to watch. There's Channel 9 in New York, and every Saturday night they had a Ranger game. Loved the games in Montreal. Loved the games in Toronto on Saturday night. And so I grew up. The Rangers will always be in my blood. But then, of course, when I was working for the Islanders, working for the Devils, you get to know the people in the organizations, and I easily converted from one team to the other. That was not an issue. That wasn't difficult. There's a professional aspect to it. But the Rangers will always be in my blood.
Bob, to capitalize on that, because you've seen all three New York metropolitan area teams, how do you compare the Ranger fan to the Islander fan and to the Devil fan?
I'm going to answer that question this way. One time when I was hosting a show on ESPN New York Radio, and the subject, we were able to talk hockey, and I had an Islander fan call up. And diehard Islander fan, and I asked him this question live on the air. I said, I want you to pretend there are two tables in front of you. The table on the left, and I said, the call, you sound like you're in your 20s. He goes, yeah, I'm 25 years old. Okay, so let's say in your lifetime, you'll have a long and successful life. Let's say you live to 100, okay? And on the table on the left, in your lifetime, the Islanders will win, let's say, 5 Stanley Cups. So, 4 or 5 Stanley Cups in your lifetime. Okay. But in all those years, you never beat the Rangers. That's the trade-off here. Table on the right, for the rest of your life, you never win a Stanley Cup with the Islanders, but you beat the Rangers every single game. Preseason, regular season, playoffs. Pick one. And he hesitated. Well, I guess I'll take the Stanley Cups.
Yeah, he had to think about that.
He had to think about that.
I'll lose to the Devils and the Islanders every game. Oh.
There is always going to be an inferiority complex with Devils fans and Islanders fans towards the Rangers. When the Islanders were winning Stanley Cups, Denny Potvin said, we're winning a Stanley Cup and the Rangers are getting the back page because they hired Herb Brooks. That's of the New York tabloid. That's the mentality of what have other than Newsday. That was the big newspaper in Long Island. But there will always be an inferiority complex among Devils fans and Islanders fans towards the Rangers. That's why you have Devils fans chanting, the Rangers suck and all this stuff. You don't have Rangers fans chanting Islanders suck or Devils suck. They have Rangers fans who are chanting Let's Go Rangers. So could there be a superiority complex among Rangers fans to the Islanders and Devils? It could be, but there's definitely an inferiority complex with Devils and Islanders fans towards the Rangers.
Yeah, it's really interesting how that works here. There's definitely room for 3 hockey teams in the New York metro area, but they're not on the same footing for sure. Just backing up, for a second, as a child going to a game, Seth, and I think we share some of the same thoughts here because we're both into broadcasting. For some reason, I always keyed into the public address announcer as being a large portion of the game experience, which you are. But I was really listening and into it. Bob Shepard at Yankee Stadium, you at MSG, if a different arena, I'm paying attention. When you're doing public address, what is your, you sit down, what's your mission? What are you trying to convey? And is there a style you tried also to execute?
Great question, Jay-Z. By the way, as an aside, I was actually recruited by the Yankees to replace Shepard, and I ended up losing a split decision. Let you know that. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's so it goes. That's a great question. Okay. When Neil Smith hired me, he wanted me, in his words, he said, I want you to be a communications source. The way hockey games and in-game entertainment has evolved, when it was just a one-person show, that I also hosted stuff between periods. When I was doing Devils games, I actually went out on the ice like a game show host and used to do that stuff too. So when that became even more involved, that's when a lot of teams started to get a second host. Sometimes you have a very good-looking female who will be you'll start seeing female public address announcers regularly now. I know the Mets have one.
The Mets, yeah.
That's going to happen more often now, absolutely. So it's a combination of being an information source, and this is very important, Jay-Z, to answer your question, getting the crowd riled up for a game. So the most important part of a game, and this is where most of the pregame money of presentation goes into, is just before the opener. That's when you get the psych-up video and the fans are on their feet. I'm doing a Red Bull game. I've been doing it for 23 years. And so you say, ladies and gentlemen, here are your New York Red Bulls or New York Rangers, whatever. And then you have the anthem, then so on and so forth. And then you do the starting lineup. And you get everyone pumped up again for the opening kickoff or the opening face-off, depending on what sport it is. And it's a little bit different in a bigger arena. For example, when I was doing the Giants, because you're so beholden to national TV. So it's a little bit harder to do in football. At the same time, in an arena, in a more intimate area, 25-seat Red Bull Arena, which is a great facility, the best soccer-specific facility in North America still. It's going at the proper times without being too much of a huckster. There's a fine line between the two. And there's a fine line between hucksterism and traditionalism, especially in soccer. When Major League Soccer started, we had in-game audio effects to maybe get the crowd going if the Red Bulls, and before that, the Metro Stars had a corner kick. After that, you had a VP of marketing who came in and wanted a more traditional FIFA approach. So the in-game remains more traditional, and there's less flexibility in soccer. You have more flexibility in hockey. Basketball, obviously, is just over the top when it comes to entertainment, but that's a different kind of sport, different presentation. Well, that started in 89 and 90. Knicks changed things around. The NBA, David Stern turned things around with that. David Stern is the big reason why you have the type of NBA that you have today. So to answer your question, Jay-Z, it's a situation where, depending upon, what the particular vice president of marketing, what the marketing department of a particular team sees the role of the public address announcer, you are always an information source, and at the same time, you have to get the crowd going at the right time. The biggest time being just before the start of the match or game.
Well, and this is what I appreciate from your work and some buildings, like MSG is, I think, known as a building. It's professional still, though. So you're able to convey that, but not be, again, overly hokey. Seth and I have gone to plenty of buildings. We like to go to away games, travel. Like, last year we're at a Predators game, and the guy's screaming, and there's some kind of like, show me your fan fingers because it's a power play. And we're like, oh my God, what is this? The fans need this? And it's a fine line, right? Like,
it depends upon what a team needs. In the newer NHL markets, they're taking more of an NBA approach because especially in Nashville, for example, you have to sell the game. You have to sell the entertainment package. So with the New York Rangers, especially, they are into being progressive, but at the same time, you don't want to lose a touch of traditional approach.
Yeah.
Same in Montreal, in Toronto, in Boston. You're not going to have the over the top because it's not going to go over well with the fan base. Your fan base is going to evolve, and younger people come up and they see what's happening in the NBA. So look what's happened in the last 10, 20 years, even for hockey games, especially between periods. But especially in the traditional markets, you don't want to lose the sense of tradition. In Nashville, and some of the newer markets in Florida, et cetera, in Phoenix or Glendale, in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, it's going to be a little bit different. So
Yes.
it depends upon the marketing scheme that the marketing department of a team wants, and then you become an arm of the marketing department, and you execute what they want you to execute.
Bob, take us through. We're joined by Bob Galerstein. Take us through the moment for you personally and then professionally as the voice of the Garden when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup.
I'll start on the professional point. Ladies and gentlemen, the Stanley Cup. And I have people who come up to me now, well, less frequent nowadays, but they want me to record that on their cell phone so that that's their ringtone. So it happens. Or when their laptop boots up, that they hear the Stanley Cup announcement. So they have that, the professional. First personal moment, I have a lot of personal professional moments. I'll tell you this story about how every public address job I ever had, I was recruited for. And that kind of makes up for all the disappointment for all the other play-by-play jobs and stuff that, well, some I did get, but others that I did not get, finishing the final two, final three, final two. In the summer of 1993, I was in the final three to go back to Philadelphia to do radio. And I really, really, really wanted that job. And it was late August, and I called up my buddy Mark Piazza, who now is like senior VP of all of Madison Square Garden, and we hooked up later on with the Rangers. And so I called him up to find out, Mark, did they make a decision? And and I was up on vacation up in the Adirondacks, and this is just before I got a cell phone. So this is 1993. And so I'm on a payphone across the street from the general store. That's how isolated I was. And so I'm on the payphone, and he's telling me, Bob, they decided to go with so-and-so from the AHL, so-and-so. And I can feel my heart going through my stomach, through my leg, and, because I really wanted to go. So anyway, Mark, thank you very much, and, we'll be in touch. And I put the phone back on the cradle. I pick it up, dial my answering machine at home to see if there are any messages. And there's one message. This is 30 seconds after I hung up the phone that found out I wasn't going back to the Flyers. There's one message on my answering machine. Hi, Bob. This is Jeannie Baumgartner from the New York Rangers. I got your name from Frank Zapavis at the NHL office. We want to know if you want to come in and audition for the Rangers public address job. 30 seconds after, and I'm not a religious person, but I looked up at the sky and I said, there really is some great plan here. In parentheses, the fellow in the NHL office, Frank Zapavis, is a friend to this day. I'd done some projects with him at the TV production company. I was with NHL and MLB Productions at the time, Phoenix Communications. And so I did 2 auditions in an empty garden in front of all of the MSG brass, in an empty garden in the middle of early September. Neil Smith went on one level, and they all went at different levels with all the contestants. And we were given scripts, and we did that. Then they called me in for a second audition to do the same thing. They said, okay, pretty good. Then they had me come in to do their 3 preseason games. They had me do the first preseason game. The other finalists did the second preseason game, and then they had me do the 3rd preseason game, and which was the last preseason game of the whole exhibition season. And right after that, good night, they came up to me and said, welcome aboard. So, and then that was 93-94 season.
Bob,
we also the All-Star game that year too.
It's interesting you say that. You keep mentioning Neil Smith. I know being at the minor league level, the general manager usually handles finances and business operations of the team. I never would think that the general manager at the NHL level would be involved in the selection of a public address announcer, but it sounds to me like...
Don't tell that to Lou Lamoriello, because he hired me for the Devils.
It's very interesting to hear that. That's a new twist that I've never really heard before. So the general manager is involved.
It depends upon the general manager. A lot of them nowadays are going to, because there's so much more on a general manager's plate, most of them will delegate authority to a VP of marketing to take care of that. And the general manager will have some ideas and may tell the VP of marketing, this is kind of like what I want. And the general manager would probably, the VP of marketing will go, this is who I want to hire. Is this okay with you? Or here are the 2 guys, who would you prefer? But in the case of Neil was very, very tradition bound because he grew up in Toronto. As a matter of fact, when he became the general manager of the Rangers, he took the 3 Stanley Cup banners that were up there and put them, they were in some warehouse somewhere, and had them redone in the same style of the Toronto Maple Leaf banners. So I don't know if you knew that. And so he had that done. Neil was very traditional oriented. He was into the modern stuff, the game presentation creeping in, but he wanted a more traditional approach, and he wanted to say this. Lou was even more hands-on than Neil, and Lou was. I can't see it nowadays. I can't see him with the Islanders doing as much as he used to, but I'm sure he still has a hand in things. But Lou, when I was with the Devils, Lou, and I got along great with Lou. He even said, "I'm a fan of yours." Like, wow, okay. Lou, I got along great with Lou, and it's a different kind. Lou's teams are not for everybody. It's a certain type of discipline there, and I thrived under it. So that was, just different GMs have different ways of doing things, and that, to answer your question, depends upon the GM.
That's fascinating to hear the comparison, Seth, and how things are run. I've learned a lot today, by the way. Like, exactly with you. I didn't think the GM had any say. I thought it was strictly the building, the arena. I've learned a ton. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Bob, there are a couple of things. Just what I've always appreciated about you, obviously, your pipes. You have broadcasters' pipes. I've known that for a while, just listening to you. But please, checks in the mail once again. My bank account's going to be empty by the time the show's over. But what I've always appreciated about you, Bob, I've listened to you for a number of years, and I hear you with SiriusXM.
Okay, good.
You're a storyteller, and you make it relatable for the listener. How important for you is that approach?
I didn't come up via the linear path of being an update anchor. It wasn't something that I had aspired to do. I was a play-by-play guy. I made my full-time NHL TV play-by-play debut at the age of 25. On my 25th birthday with the Flyers, I replaced Mike Emmerich when he came up to New York for the first time. So that was, and I thought, but then what happened there was he was one of many victims of Ed Snyder's excessively messy divorce from his first wife, rest in peace, Ed, where he his first wife wanted to take the thing that was most beholden to him, that was the hockey team. So he had to up the ante. So he had to sell off the main Maryland AHL team, the Prism cable channel, and a lot of people got laid off. And so they went to a simulcast. So that's what happened to me there. So I went off on a tangent here. What was your original question, Seth? I'm sorry.
No, these stories are great.
About anchoring, yeah.
No, we could do this all day. We could do this all day.
It's about telling a story. So
yeah,
I have a background of play-by-play announcer. I have a background as doing a TV production pre and post for many, many years, and I try to incorporate that within the limitations of an update. And that's why you'll hear the intros that I will do when time permits for a particular story. And that's, sometimes you just can't because there's so much going on. But when I craft a script, I try to make it that I'm crafting a show. And also when time permits, I try to have what we call a back of the book story at the end of a cast. Something that'll put a smile on your face, something that is not necessarily hard news, something that is we call soft news. And if it's a good-natured, a good-feeling thing, something that will make you chuckle, laugh, or go, huh, like what? But I make you think. And sometimes that's the item that the people remember most from the whole cast is the last item that I put in there. So that's how I put together a cast, and that's why sometimes it's time for only nuts and bolts, but depending upon a given day, sometimes you have room to be a little creative.
Bob, I remember there was a day at SiriusXM. We talked about the late Ed Ingles and the impact he had on a lot of folks in the New York City market. For you, listening to radio growing up, who did you emulate? Who do you kind of craft your style after?
Someone who I had too much into my play-by-play when I was with the Flyers, and they used to tease me, used to call me Marv Galerstein. So that was Marv Albert, of course. Marv, he, obviously, you go for the Bucks and you go for the network TV Bucks, but when he would do a radio Rangers game or a radio Knicks game, nobody was better. Nobody has ever been better than Marv on radio doing hockey or basketball. And that was the person.
Jason, anything else before we wrap up?
No, I love the insight today. Learned a lot of the background.
I'm going to quiz you if you learned a lot.
But if you could get back, and it's an every night thing, if you could get back into a public address situation here tomorrow, would you still be all gung ho?
Oh, of course. I mean, well, I was recruited by the XFL Guardians, and I did. I did the Guardians the first 2 games, and they were, put it this way: if there was no COVID-19 situation, the XFL situation, they were going to come back in 2021.
Sure.
But the XFL became the first league that was killed by the COVID-19 virus. So I enjoyed it. And what's so ironic about the XFL Guardians, the president of the team, Janet Duke, she was a manager of marketing for the Rangers when I was there.
Oh, wow.
So it's
small world.
One of those situations where, you keep in touch and you never know, because you're going to bump into these people down the road. It can be a small world sometimes.
Bob, last thing for me. Do you think the NHL comes back this year?
They shouldn't. Because let's say they come back, and then when are you going to start the season after that? And it's going to be. But here's another thing too. Everyone, you guys are in your dungeons right now. I'm in my kitchen, and people are. The weather's getting good, and let's say the NHL decides we're going to start up in August. Who's going to want to be watching NHL when you want to be on the beach? Okay, you can bring your mobile, you watch on your phone, but are you really going to go to the beach to watch a hockey game, or are you going to watch people of the opposite sex? Okay, I mean, you want to go swimming, you want to I don't think this is necessarily going to be a good thing for them, and I think there are going to be injuries. And when do you start the following season? Because training camp always opens September 14th or so.
Yeah.
So I just don't see it happening.
I agree for all those reasons. Bob Galerstein, thank you so much. I mean, it doesn't get much better than this. We appreciate the reminiscing, the stories, the insight. It's been wonderful.
Well,
thank you, Bob.
Seth, I cannot wait to see you back in the newsroom, especially very, very early in the morning when we're still, drinking 5 cups of coffee and
same here. Or when I have to run out of the newsroom to chase. Or when I have to run out of the newsroom to chase down a meter maid after my car got towed on Christmas. Bob was there for that. He solved everything.
I remember getting the messages from you about it.
And I made it back. And I made it back in time for my 9:30 update. Didn't miss one.
I was amazed. I was ready to come out of the bullpen and pinch hit for you, but you did.
Bob, it's a pleasure. I enjoy learning from you and talking with you, and thank you again for your time, and stay safe.
All right, next time in the newsroom, stories that are not ready for prime time.
Sounds good. All the best to you and yours, Bob. Thanks again. Have a great night.
Stay healthy. Stay safe.
You too. Bob Galerstein, SiriusXM Morning Drive sports anchor, former public address announcer at Madison Square Garden when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup. He's worked with the Giants, Islanders, Flyers, Devils, Red Bulls, you name it. What a resume. And does it get much better than that? I mean, 2 weeks in a row, we have Howie Carpet, and this week, Bob Galerstein. Just
Seth, you know how to pick them. They're great storytellers. And you know what's interesting? They get our comments. People start sharing things about themselves. I mean, look at Greg Anzano. We just learned that he likes watching hockey in his Speedo, all because we were just talking about hockey in the summer. So, no, it was really fascinating and reminiscing. Well, we're really trying to, during this time, talk about things, good moments in New York sports in the past, and we're going to try to keep that theme going as we go along here. It's fun.
Well, one of my close friends, when we first came up with the idea, and we'll go over an hour tonight. I'm fine with it. I've got nowhere else to be, and Bob was so great. We're happy to carry the show past 9 o'clock. We don't have anybody that is going to be mad at us for going a little bit late. But when we were coming up with the concept for doing this, I know you've had a love of broadcasting, and our paths have taken us different ways. But one of my friends said something to me. He said, you need to find a way to differentiate yourselves, and you need to find a different angle, because everybody's talking about coronavirus right now. Everybody's talking about whether sports got to come back and this contingency and that contingency. So, one of the angles that we discussed, and I think it's worked out pretty well for us, why don't we have these figures? I have access to, I've made friends. These are guys that I listened to growing up, and now I'm lucky enough to say that I work alongside them. I still look up to them, and why not reminisce with folks like this, like Bob and Howie and Peter Schwartz, and we're going to talk with Zig next week about the draft. But we have access to these people, so let's take advantage of that. And I think we've really been able to gain a lot from that.
Yeah, it's been a good time. So thanks for acquiring it. And my background looks like I'm on fire.
It does, yeah. There's going to be a well. You're not too.
I'm good.
You're not too far from Roswell, New Mexico, so it looks like you have an alien
close.
lady.
I'm not even close to Roswell.
No, well, you're closer than I am. So Bob touched on something before we bring Diamond Dan in. It was the last topic that I wanted to talk about before we interviewed Bob, but I didn't want to keep him waiting. So Dr. Fauci, America's doctor, came out and said that sports could return relatively soon. He didn't put a date on it, but if sports were to come back, it could happen relatively quickly. And it could happen, it would happen, have to happen without fans. You'd have to quarantine the players, do mass testing on a consistent basis. Now, what do you think?
So, first of all, if you're doing testing, it has to be easier. You can't get a week to get your results as it goes now. No fans isn't my major concern. My major concern is when we start gimmicks, changing the rules of the leagues, like we had talked about with that lockdown scenario where they were going to change a ton of rules with the baseball game. No fans. Let's play the game with no fans. Let's play the game, though. The game is supposed to be. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is what I'll say. I'm with you. I don't want to see gimmicks. I don't want to see rules that are going to mess with the integrity of the game or integrity of the season. I'm kind of with Bob. I mean, now you're talking about college football. You're talking about college campuses that may not reopen until January, but yet you're going to play NHL and NBA games. So this is playing out exactly, and I'm not trying to take credit for this, but this is playing out exactly how I thought it would play out. I am still committed to the fact, or committed to the opinion, that you're not going to see anything until at least the NFL season. And now, given that one of the contingencies for college football is potentially not playing until the spring, which I guess is a plan B, but I'm not really thrilled about it. I think the NFL season, at least with fans to start, that could be in jeopardy. I don't want to see gimmicks. If I'm the NHL and I'm the NBA and I have a window to come back, I'm going straight to the playoffs. Bubble teams, you know what? You should have won more games in November and December. Those count too. You're going straight to the playoffs. If you want to shorten the series from 7 games to 5, all right. But I'm going 1-8-4-5 in the NBA, and I'm doing it how they normally do it in the NHL. If you got to play at a neutral site, which you're going to have to, that's fine. Now with baseball, when I first heard the Arizona and Florida plan, I said, okay, this makes sense from a logistical standpoint because teams can stay at their complexes. But you're losing me when you're going to realign the divisions based on the Grapefruit League and the Cactus League. But that's what you have to do because that's where the teams are in Florida and Arizona. So I'm actually going back now to baseball's Arizona plan where you centralize everybody, keep the divisions from what I understand. And to me, that makes more sense because that keeps the integrity of the game relatively intact. So if I'm going with a plan, I'm going with Arizona.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. The division should be the same. The game should be the same. Keep the integrity as much as you can without the fans, and then we can have something there.
Yeah. So that's where I stand on that. All right. So one of your friends last week, Jason, had a suggestion, and it was a good suggestion, and it's a suggestion that I implemented when I had some time off this week. And he said that we should, on our little ticker, we should display all the Major League Baseball games that have been postponed. So I'm going to rub some salt in the wounds right now.
Depressing.
Asking you shall receive. Boom. There are all the
Yikes.
baseball games that should have been played tonight.
Let's see. The Cubs, Nationals, that would have been good. Braves, Mets, a divisional series. That would have been a very interesting game tonight.
Yankees weren't scheduled to play tonight.
Are they not? Okay. Yeah, those NL games were decent. Light schedule tonight. Nothing else was too exciting.
Who was that? Who was that requested?
I think it was Josh that requested it. So we listen to our viewers.
We do. And speaking of someone else we listen to, maybe a little bit too much, but he's here. Diamond Dan checking in from Hamilton, Massachusetts.
Good evening, gentlemen. And hat tip to Bob Galerstein for showing up tonight. That was fascinating.
Wasn't that great?
back when I used to commute to work, I got to listen to Bob in the morning on XM, SiriusXM, and just like when I hear you, Seth, and I got to tell you, that guy, you two are the class of the field. And, I guess I learned tonight that he was also, the voice that said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Stanley Cup," after the Rangers won in '94. I never knew that. So that's pretty interesting stuff. So really cool to hear from Bob. And next time, whenever the next time we're in the city, first round, post quarantine's on me, Bob. All right.
He's great. Soundtrack of my youth. Just like other guys like Mike and the Mad Dog and John Sterling. For me, guys like him are at the Pantheon. And the fact that I have to sit next to him, sometimes I actually pinch myself and have the opportunity to get advice when I work at SiriusXM with Bob Galerstein. It's just great. So on that note, what we're going to do now is we're going to take every sport and we're going to pick our favorite broadcasters. Again, Bob, Marv Albert, guys like that, to me, they're at the top. So guys like that go without saying. But we're going to go with all the different sports, and we're going to select our favorite broadcaster from each sport.
Good stuff.
All right.
Do it.
So Diamond Dan, you're up first. Baseball.
Oh man, that's a tough one. I won't say Joe Buck, but I'm going to go back to my early days as a kid growing up outside of the New York area, and Milo Hamilton from the Houston Astros was a voice you would associate with summer, and he always had his catchphrase was "Holy Toledo, the Astros win." So that'll live with me for the rest of my life, and that's that I would say that he was a standard bearer from early in my days.
Not a bad choice whatsoever. Jason, and this can be any broadcaster, past or present. They don't have to be on the air right now.
For baseball and pushing it for hockey, but for baseball, for sure, Gary Thorne. Gary Thorne is a guy I'll watch. Yankees, Orioles, I'm tuning into Masson, not Yes. And there's a lot of bad broadcasters and teams out there, so you can joke all you want. But Gary, so I don't always do that. I'll watch Yes usually, like 99% of the time. But Gary Thorne, I'll flip to Channel 4. What I like about, he's excited when he needs to be excited and very excited. But when the game needs to breathe and it's a big moment, he lets it breathe. He finds a balance of really hot excitement when it's time, but a big moment, then he'll breathe and let the noises of the crowd come through. It's very hard to do, and it's a lost art. Gary Thorne is terrific.
I remember two Gary Thorne calls in the 95 wild card round, the Yankees. One of them was when Mattingly hit that home run in game 2. Was it game 2?
Yes. Yeah.
Hold on to the roof.
So good.
Hold on to the roof. And then there was another one, goodbye, when O'Neill hit the home run. Goodbye home run into the night of New York. Those have been two that stand out.
And he is so good. He's not a homer. He's so good to the big moment of either team. Last year, when Gleyber Torres was absolutely ripping Baltimore, his banter and his reactions were legendary.
Yeah.
He's great. Gary Thorne.
All right, so I'm going to take Vince Scully. Vince Scully's the Pantheon for me. Descriptiveness, letting the game breathe. He's a legend. Best baseball broadcaster to ever live. And there's really nothing else I can say about Vince Scully. All right, basketball. I'm going to start out with Mike Breen.
Yeah.
I grew up listening to Mike Breen. I listened to Marv, obviously, but I also listened to Mike Breen on WFAN, and it doesn't surprise me that Mike Breen is the best national NBA broadcaster there is right now on ABC and ESPN. So Mike Breen would be my favorite basketball broadcaster. Again, knowing that guys like Marv are at the Pantheon, and that would be an easy answer, I'm going to take a creative route and go Mike Breen. Jason?
I second Mike Breen. It was right here on my paper. I'm not being a homer. This guy is A1. I'm so glad he's a national guy now, and he was recognized.
Absolutely. Dan?
Well, I'll do a little. I mean, Mike Breen, as a New Yorker, obviously listen to him do sports updates on Imus in the morning. Great guy. But I'm going to go with Gus Johnson just because that guy cannot control himself. And, his calls during the NCAA tournament really, when they were showing some games, a couple weeks ago that were from previous years, it made you sentimental, that you were missed in the tournament, but hopefully, we'll get him in the future. But Gus Johnson for sure, with vigor and zeal, is is a at the top of my list.
Not a bad choice at all. All right, football, Dan. Let's stick with you.
Football. I mean, you gotta, Pat. I need a minute to think about that one because, you've got pro football, college football. There's so many voices, but I mean, the pantheon for me at the top is Kevin Harlan and Ian Eagle. Those guys are also the soundtracks of November and December, January, especially when it comes playoff time on SiriusXM or Westwood One Radio. Those guys, you hear that voice and you know that it's a big game.
Great choice.
That's a really good choice, especially Kevin Harlan. I went with Pat Summerall. I feel like he's in the Vince Scully category. There's a certain delivery that is old school and traditional, and he had the pipes. The Pat Summerall pipes are one of a kind, and his cadence with calling a game was really, really unparalleled. So soundtrack of my youth with football for me, what I remember, Pat Summerall.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm going a little outside the box here. I'm going with the three-headed monster of Al Michaels, Frank Gifford, and Dan Dierdorf.
Al, Frank, and Dan.
Michaels is right there, man. He's good.
Al, Frank, and Dan. But I'm going with them as ABC Monday Night Football broadcasters, and I'll tell you why. When I was a kid, if my dad let me stay up late to watch a Giants game back when football was played at 9 o'clock and nobody complained about late start times, it was a big game. And Al, Frank, and Dan were there for the big game. And I also sing the Hank Williams Jr. song very frequently. So I'm going with Al, Frank, and Dan, the three-headed monster for Monday Night Football, ABC's Monday Night Football.
Can Monday Night Football actually be a thing again? Could we stop with the marquee matchup on either Sunday night or Sunday afternoon? Monday Night Football needs to be the marquee matchup of the week.
ESPN's trying to do it. They're trying to get the big names, but they seem to be losing out to everybody. They lost Romo to CBS.
And not so much even the broadcaster, the game. The game is not good.
Well, as long as NBC has Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, that's all on NBC.
It's all, as long as it's all about what you pay for the rights. So
I would also like to say an honorable mention would be Brad Nessler and previously Vern Lundquist for doing SEC football on CBS. Yep. Those guys were pros. And I mean, Nessler, back when NCAA football was still in video games, with his 64-bit body and his voice, he defines college football. So that's just another one I wanted to drop in there.
I will also give an honorable, and I have a few honorable mentions I'll give. Keith Jackson. Keith Jackson calling college football the Rose Bowl with the mountains of Pasadena with the sun setting as a kid on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. New Year's Day, Keith Jackson, another golden voice. All right, Jason, you're the hockey guy, followed by Dan. You're the top two hockey fans in my life. So, Jason, who's your favorite hockey broadcaster?
I have a hard time here because it's just so simple. I mean, Sam Rosen for us, for me, it's unparalleled as a fan. However, and I'm going to get killed for this, Mike Emmerich is really the top guy. If I'm being objective here, Mike Emmerich is the top guy, and I'm going to get absolutely roasted in 3 seconds on a comment. But there's a level he brings for any game. It could be a game in the second week of September. Mike Emmerich makes it sound like a playoff game, and he's not. And he's really good. We're used to him. Growing up, he was the Devils guy, right? So we're clouded. But he calls a national game, and he calls a national game right down the side, right down the middle. He calls any national game right down the middle, and that's not something you could say for every broadcaster.
Dan?
Well, I'm going to go a little bit outside the box here. Obviously John Davidson, now the president of the Rangers, was somebody we grew up with. But outside of New York, I got to give it to Joe Beninati from NBC Sports Washington, covering the Washington Capitals. He's a Long Island guy. Grew up covering, started his career covering hockey and I think lacrosse for Hofstra out on Long Island. Also the alma mater of my dad. So big ups there. But I got to meet Joe B once, and I made fun of him because he was a homer, and then he blamed his battery mate instead. But I mean, Joe does a great job of bringing the game to reality, and I'll give him credit for that one.
All right, for me, I'm going with Jason. Nobody rises to the big moment better in hockey than Doc Emmerich. I'm going Doc Emmerich. It's tough because Sam is on that soundtrack of my youth, and my heart says, no, that's okay. My heart says Sam, but my mind says Doc. But they're two great broadcasters, so that's where I'm going.
Do we have a section for most of rounded guy? Because I feel like I left someone off who really deserves recognition here.
Well, yes, and I think that kind of ties into our next category. So what I wanted to do was take two categories, TV and radio. So TV and radio. It could be any sport. Best TV play-by-play guy.
He's saying goodnight.
So
okay, Dan, tuck in your kid.
That's good.
Do me next.
Some of us have responsibilities. Mine are laying on the couch. Kenny Albert calls every game.
On TV.
Kenny calls everything, and he works every night of the week. This guy is a pro's pro. Kenny Albert does a heck of a job. I think he calls boxing. I mean, hey, you put a microphone in front of Kenny Albert's face, and dude is off to the races. I hope he's in line for Sam Rosen when it is time, when Sam Rosen does decide to hang it up. Kenny Albert is absolutely fantastic.
All right, okay, so that's your TV guy. Kenny's your
That's
TV guy.
my because he is on TV. I mean, he does TV. He's my all around guy, really.
Okay. Good choice. All right, Dan.
What are we doing? TV commentators?
You can take somebody that we didn't include as your utility broadcaster, or you can take a TV guy and a radio guy if you want.
All right. Well, as a TV guy, I'll go way back to Kenny Mayne because he was he was a great broadcaster when SportsCenter was still in his infancy, and I got to also meet Kenny Mayne once at a U.S. Open at Shinnecock Hills back in 2004, and he was just one of the nicest guys around. So I feel like Kenny Mayne was really one of the guys that really brought SportsCenter and ESPN into the forefront. And then as far as radio goes, I'm going to go with Bob Galerstein because that guy. I'll tell you, he's like he was saying about telling a story and, making it all, flow together. His updates, even though, they're brief and they're concise, he does a great job of bringing it all to light. And I think, there's somebody on this show too that does the same. So
checks in the mail, man. I'm not going to have any money left by the end of the night. He had to be talking about you, Jason.
Right.
Bob is on that Pantheon list for me. He's on the list with a lot of the other greats that I mentioned before. So Bob is definitely there for me. As far as TV, I'm going to draw a lot of ire with this one, but I love Joe Buck. I'll tell you why, because he lets the game breathe at a big moment. And a lot of broadcasters try to make it about them at a big moment, and they try to talk over the big moment, and Joe Buck doesn't do that. And I think he gets criticized for not having enough excitement or energy in that big moment, but he lets the energy of the crowd kind of take over and he lets that breathe, and that becomes the important part of the broadcast. So I'm taking Joe Buck as my favorite TV guy, and I am taking, as far as radio play-by-play, I am taking Kevin Harlan, because Kevin Harlan can take a moment that has nothing to do with the game itself and actually make it interesting.
Like a cat running across the field or something.
Yeah, exactly. But Kevin Harlan is on the radio. He's as descriptive as it gets, and he does it in a way. He gives so much in the way of description. You think he'd fall behind the action of the game, but he doesn't. And it's brilliant. And he has energy. He's got everything. So Kevin Harlan would be on my list for radio. Now, I have some honorable mentions. Howie Rose. I think Howie Rose is
we got a ton of Howie Rose comments, too.
Yep. I think Howie Rose is as good of a baseball broadcaster on the radio as you're going to find. Pacing, tempo, descriptiveness, letting the broadcast breathe. I put Sam Rosen on that list. John Sterling, part of the soundtrack of my youth. It's amazing to me. I put John Sterling there because I was driving in my car at 16, 17 years old in my crappy Mazda 323, and I heard John Sterling, and now I'm driving around, 38 years old, and I have a 2-year-old screaming in the back, and I can still listen to John Sterling calling a Yankee game. And then Bob Papa. I think Bob Papa technically.
Yes.
Bob Papa technically calls a football game on the radio as well as anybody, so I would put them on my honorable mention list.
I think football is very hard to call on the radio, very hard, and it's hard for the listener to understand formations. You have to really know football, and I have a hard time. But Bob Papa, I follow Bob Papa's game to a T.
Yeah,
and the guy can call golf too. I've heard him call the Masters before, so he can do anything.
There are so many, and I think I'm a little biased being in New York that I didn't get a chance to hear the Ernie Harwells of the world as much. And there's certain attachments that you have when you live in a city to specific broadcasters, and it's not a slight on any one broadcaster. I mean, Bob Waldron just said Chick Hearn, the legendary Lakers broadcaster, growing up listening to a guy like that. Gary Cohen.
Don't call him Bob Waldron. It's Robert.
Robert.
You're gonna catch hell for that.
Sorry,
I'm gonna
Bob.
catch hell for that.
Sorry, Bob. I mean, Robert.
Oh my God, his face is red right now. If I know it, his face is red.
Gary Cohen. I mean, this is just, just because we make a selection here, it doesn't mean that we're slighting anybody else. I could go on and talk about this for hours. We could do a whole show on this. Okay. Moving on. Moving right along. This day in sports history. All right. 1929, the Yankees become the first team to wear uniform numbers.
All right. No, that's a big deal. And that's all to this day they have on there.
With no names. That's it. Yeah.
That's freaking awesome.
Revolutionized the game forever. 1935, Babe Ruth's first National League game for the Boston Braves, including a home run. Got a home run that day. Stanley Cup Final, 1939, Boston Gardens. Bruins beat the Maple Leafs 3-1. 4-1 series win. Jason, do you know why that series was significant?
Why was that series significant?
Because it was the first best of 7 Stanley Cup Final.
Oh.
All right. 1980, the late Arthur Ashe retires from tennis. 1987, very appropriate because we talked about Michael Jordan earlier. MJ becomes the second NBA player to score 3,000 points in a season, joining Wilt Chamberlain, who actually did it 4 times. Jordan, for all the LeBron lovers out there, Jordan was actually the last player to do it. 3,000 points. Wow. 1992, at the time, the Rangers won a team record 50th game.
That team.
At the time. They won 52 and 94 when they won the Cup. They actually won a team record 53 in 2015 when they lost to the Lightning in the Eastern Conference Finals. That was a 7-game series, right, Jason?
Yeah.
They struck a nerve there, Dan. And then they won 51 in 2012 when they lost to the Devils in the Eastern Conference Finals. They only won when they went to the Cup and lost to the Kings. I think they only won in the mid-40s in the regular season. They got hot towards the end. Is that right?
The next season they were actually better, 2015, and then the playoff disappointment in 2015. So, interesting.
And then how could I forget this for all the New Englanders out there? And Dan's probably been hearing this all day from Patriots Nation. 20 years ago today, Tom Brady was drafted by the Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
199th pick.
Interesting.
All right. Couple of losses that we are mourning. Brian Dennehy, the actor Brian Dennehy, passed away today. Dan, your favorite Brian Dennehy movie?
What was it? Tommy Boy.
Good choice. Mine, the animated Brian Dennehy made an appearance in South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut.
That's right, he did.
Wow.
When they were singing What Would Brian Boitano Do, he popped out and said, I'm Brian Dennehy. And then they shoved him out of the way. So
I think I got to go with that then. I think I do remember that.
South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. Brian Dennehy, my favorite Brian Dennehy movie. He also had a good role in Cocoon, underrated role in Cocoon.
True.
1980s movie. Okay, and then the one that we're really broken up over, Jason, I know that you had a hard time with this one.
We do. No, I did. It's a serious soundtrack of our youth. Here, just listen. Fink, man, the Fink.
Sad.
Oh, not a good day. Not a good day.
The Fink. Tell you what I think of the Fink. Another one. I talk about the soundtrack of my youth. Some names pop up, not immediately, and that's a name that doesn't pop up right away. But you think of a guy like him. I mean, that's your marquee introduction for all the big wrestling events as a child. and Hulk Hogan would battle Macho Man, the Ultimate Warrior, and all the big-time matches. If this match is scheduled for one fall. So the thinking Mean Gene Okerlund, a year apart.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Telling you. This year just, goodness.
No, it hasn't been a good year. Couple of listener comments. Joshua Cox would only be a Monday Night Football broadcaster if he got to drive around in the Booger Mobile, which doesn't exist anymore because Booger is now in the booth. Pat Mannion checking in. One of the reasons you brought this up before, it all has to do with how much you pay for the rights, but we also talked about why Monday Night Football isn't what it used to be. Not going to happen. Too hard to flex games to Monday, and he's got a point there because it's one less day that you have to prepare for the following week. So Pat is right on that. Tom Vislaki checked in, and let's see. I don't know if I can find the comment. One of his favorite broadcasters, Vern Lundquist. Vern Lundquist, the way he called a golf round.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Vern Lundquist, terrific broadcaster. Football, basketball, and then golf as well. So some of our listeners checking in. So next week, we're going to be on at a different time. I think, Dan, tell me if I'm wrong. Jason, tell me if I'm wrong. But I just have a feeling that being on next Thursday night at 8 o'clock is probably a futile effort.
I would agree.
Probably.
We're all going to be watching the draft, and we want to hang on to the viewers that we have. So we're going to be on next week. We're going to be on next Tuesday at 8 Eastern. And Zig Fracassi of SiriusXM NFL Radio is going to be joining us, and he's going to preview the NFL draft.
Wow. Look at that.
And then
How do you beat that? Like, get ready for the draft right here with us.
So Zig Fracassi, Bob Galerstein, Howie Carpin, Peter Schwartz. It's been our lineup of guests so far. Oh, and Ray Martell. Talking about rest stop on the I-95 corridor.
Love you, Ray.
So Zig Fracassi is going to be joining us next week, guys. Any final thoughts?
No, I'm excited for next week. I really am, and I can't wait for all the emotions to come back. Just like last year, we hated the Daniel Jones pick, right? Because you never know what's going to happen. So we're here to overanalyze. Get ready. It's going to be hopefully a fun week because, we need something. So I don't care what the Giants draft. I don't care if they draft a punter in the first round, right? I mean, at this point, let's go.
Yes, you do. Starving for content. Dan, where do you think the Giants go in the first round of the draft?
Well, I mean, of course, we all want Chase Young to fall, to their spot, but it's not going to happen. I agree with your earlier assessment. I haven't done as much preparation for the draft as I think you have, but I mean, anytime you can help out that offensive line and move forward, I mean, you have a marquee running back, you have a second-year quarterback who's now been handed the keys to the kingdom with a new head coach and a new coaching staff. So you're going to need to buy your guys some time, and that's where it's going to begin. And the Giants have always, focused on the Big Blue Wrecking Crew defense. So linebacker, cornerback doesn't hurt, but I think you have to start at the offensive line if someone, if that's the best available option.
Yeah, I think they need a pass rusher, but I think they need an offensive lineman more for the reasons that you just gave. So I think the Giants go offensive line in the first round. We'll talk about it with Zig next week. This has been the Grand Central Sports Hub, episode 4.5 in the books for Jay-Z and Diamond Dan. Seth Cantor saying thank you from Dumont, New Jersey. We'll speak to you next Tuesday night at 8 Eastern. Be well.
Good night.
Good night.